This question comes from Ethan, who asks, what if the moon disappeared for 24 hours? My question for Ethan is, what exactly did the moon do that it only gets a 24-hour suspension? Because losing your phone for a day is annoying. Losing the moon for a day is the kind of thing that makes the entire planet collectively stop, point upward, and say, okay, no, put that back. And at first that might not sound like the end of the world. It's just the moon. A big rock. A glowing night ornament. Earth's emotional support satellite. But the moon is not just hanging up there to make poetry work. It is doing stuff. A lot of stuff. Quietly. Constantly. And if it vanished for 24 hours, even briefly, the effects would be weird enough, serious enough, and unsettling enough that humanity would never shut up about it again. So let's start simple. The moon disappears. Not explodes. Not turns invisible. Not hides behind the largest and most suspicious cloud in history. Gone. Mass and all. Which is important, because if it only became invisible, that would mostly be a sky problem. Creepy. Yes. Interesting. Definitely. But not catastrophic. Its gravity would still be there. The tides would still behave normally. Astronomers would panic for 5 minutes, then calm down and say, okay, it's still there, it's just being dramatic. But that is not our scenario. Our scenario is that the moon truly disappears. No light, no gravity, no moon. For 24 full hours. Now here's the first strange detail. You would not notice immediately, because the moon is far away, about 384,000 kilometers from Earth. That means both its light and any change in its gravitational influence take a little over 1 second to reach us. So if the moon vanished, Earth would get one final second of normal, one last second of a universe that still made sense. And then the sky changes, the pull changes, reality updates, and the first thing most people would notice is the light, or rather the lack of it. If the moon disappears during a full moon, the difference would be dramatic. Moonlight is much brighter than people usually realize. A full moon can cast shadows, it can light up landscapes, it can turn a field, a rooftop, or an empty road into something silver and visible and strangely alive. Take that away instantly, and the night becomes much darker. Not cozy darker, not romantic darker, more like why does the world suddenly feel unfinished darker. Anyone outside would notice, campers would notice, drivers on rural roads would notice, people walking home would notice. At least one person would definitely try taking a photo of the empty sky and somehow still end up with a blurry white blob. But the visual darkness is only the appetizer, because the real power of the moon is not in the light it reflects, it is in the gravity it exerts. The moon is the main reason Earth has strong ocean tides. The sun also contributes, but the moon is the dominant force. It is the lead actor. The sun is supporting cast, which is funny because the sun is vastly bigger, but the moon is much closer, and gravity cares a lot about distance. So when the moon disappears, Earth does not lose tides entirely, but it loses the strongest tidal driver, and that means ocean tides would weaken substantially, not instantly flatten out, not become a giant still pond, but shrink, sharply. The solar tides would still remain, but they are much weaker than the lunar ones, so coastlines all over the world would start behaving differently. Now the oceans would not respond like a machine switching modes. Water has momentum, the tides already in motion would keep moving for a while, the oceans would have to readjust. And because the oceans are huge and messy and full of coastlines, basins, currents and underwater geography, that readjustment would not happen neatly. It would happen like a giant bowl of soup being nudged unexpectedly. Some coastal areas would see lower than normal tides. Some places would get strange currents. Harbors and bays could experience odd sloshing patterns as the system tried to settle into its new, weaker solar-only rhythm. So no, this would not create an instant global megatsunami. The moon disappearing does not mean the ocean suddenly stands up and charges at the continents. That is not how tides work, but it would absolutely disrupt marine systems, coastal infrastructure, shipping routes, fisheries, and tidal ecosystems. And this is where the hook gets deeper, because Earth is full of life that depends on the moon without ever having gone to astronomy class. A huge number of organisms use lunar cycles as timing signals. Corals coordinate spawning with moon phases. Sea turtles use moonlight to navigate. Many fish, birds, insects, and marine animals rely on the regular rhythm of moonlight or tides for feeding, mating, migration, or avoiding predators. For them, the moon is not decoration, it is part of the operating system. And suddenly, for 24 hours, that operating system crashes. Imagine evolving for millions of years in a world where the moon reliably shows up, the tides reliably rise, and the night reliably follows a pattern. Then one night the universe says, actually no schedule tonight, good luck. Some animals would delay behaviors, some would mistime them, some would be drawn to the wrong cues, some would panic in whatever their species-specific version of panic is, which, for squid, is already pretty dramatic. Now let's talk about Earth itself, because whenever people hear moon disappears, the next question is usually, what happens to Earth's orbit? Do we get flung into space? Do we start drifting toward the sun? Do we roll off the table like a marble? No, not even close. Earth's motion around the sun is dominated by the sun's gravity. The moon matters to Earth, but not enough that removing it for one day would suddenly send the planet flying off script. Our orbit around the sun would stay almost exactly the same. There would be a tiny change because Earth and moon normally orbit a shared center of mass. So Earth does a subtle monthly wobble as part of the Earth-Moon system. Take the moon away and that wobble disappears. Astronomers would measure it. Physics departments would have the worst best day of their lives. But ordinary people would not feel Earth move in any obvious way. Your coffee would not slide off the table. Your sofa would not begin migrating toward Neptune. That said, the moon does play an important long-term role in stabilizing Earth's axial tilt. And this part matters a lot. Earth is tilted by about 23.5 degrees. That tilt is what gives us seasons. Over very long timescales, planets can wobble, and the moon helps keep Earth's tilt relatively stable. It acts like a gravitational stabilizer. Not perfectly, but enough. Without the moon over millions of years, Earth's tilt could vary much more wildly. That could mean much more chaotic climate patterns over geological time, more extreme seasonal shifts, less long-term stability, potentially a much stranger planet. But in 24 hours, nothing major happens on that front. Earth does not suddenly tip sideways like someone kicked the stand out from under it. The tilt issue is a long game. This scenario is a short-term emergency. Now you may also hear people say, wouldn't earthquakes or volcanoes go crazy? And the answer is, probably not in the big cinematic way people imagine. Yes, the moon exerts tidal forces not just on the oceans, but also slightly on Earth's crust. There is some evidence that these tiny stresses can influence the timing of certain events in very sensitive systems. But the moon is not remotely controlling earthquakes like a DJ dropping tectonic bass. Earthquakes happen because Earth's crust is full of stored stress from plate tectonics. Volcanoes erupt because magma, pressure, chemistry, and geology are complicated and rude. So removing the moon for one day would not suddenly trigger worldwide volcanic mayhem, nor would it magically calm the planet down. Earth is perfectly capable of being geologically inconvenient all by itself. Now let's go back to the sky, because psychologically this would hit humanity hard. The moon is one of those background constants we don't think about until it's gone. It is older than trees, older than mammals, older than almost every familiar thing in the living world. Human beings have looked up at it for tens of thousands of years. We have written myths about it, measured time with it, navigated by it, painted it, sung about it, blamed it for strange behavior, and repeatedly failed to photograph it correctly with our phones. It is part of our mental furniture. So when it disappears, even for one night, something deep in the human brain would recoil. This is not just a scientific event, it is an emotional one. Religious interpretations would explode overnight. Financial markets would react. Conspiracy channels would enter a state of spiritual overclocking. Scientists would be dragged in front of microphones and ask questions like, could this be the beginning of the end? While they were still trying to figure out whether gravity had filed for divorce. And then we get to the deeper scientific problem. Because the biggest question is not really what happens while the moon is gone. The biggest question is, how did it disappear? Because physics does not have a nice tidy setting for temporarily removed moon. If the moon were destroyed, the debris would be a disaster. If it shattered, Earth would not be having a quirky tidal adjustment problem. Earth would be having the sky is now a weapons factory problem. Moon fragments raining down, altered trajectories, long-term orbital chaos that gets ugly fast. So destruction is out, unless you want the story to become much worse. What if it turned invisible? As we said earlier, then its mass and gravity still remain, which makes this mostly a visibility mystery. That is unsettling, but manageable. What if it turned into a black hole with the same mass? Strangely, gravity-wise, Earth would barely notice. From a distance, the gravitational pull would be the same. The tides would remain roughly the same. Orbitally, things would be similar. But visually, you now have an invisible moon-mass black hole orbiting Earth, which is somehow even less comforting than just losing the moon. That is the kind of sentence that makes astrophysicists sit down very slowly. What if it were teleported away? Well, congratulations. You no longer have a moon problem. You have a civilization-ending technology problem. Because anything capable of moving the moon in or out of Earth's system on command is so far beyond current science that the missing moon is probably just the beginning of your concerns. So from a scientific point of view, a 24-hour lunar disappearance is not just unlikely, it is aggressively illegal under known physics. And yet, if it happened, Earth would survive. That is the important part. Humanity would survive, the planet would keep orbiting, the sky would be darker, the tides would weaken and become confused, wildlife would be disrupted, scientists would not sleep, the internet would become unbearable, but the world would not end. Then, after 24 hours, the moon returns. And that creates a second wave of weirdness, because the moment it comes back, its gravity comes back too. Again, after about 1.3 seconds, which means the oceans have to readjust again. Tidal systems that spent a day trying to settle into solar-only behavior would suddenly get the moon back and have to reorganize a second time. So Earth gets hit with two disturbances. One when the moon leaves, another when it returns. Oceanographers, marine biologists, and anyone whose job involves coastal prediction would age 10 years in a weekend. And the psychological effect of the return might be even greater than the disappearance, because once the moon comes back, humanity would never see it the same way again. Not as a background object, not as a pretty ornament, not as a giant lamp for poets and wolves, but as what it really is, a massive gravitational partner, a stabilizer, a tide maker, a cosmic clock, a silent piece of infrastructure hanging in space. And like most infrastructure, you only truly appreciate it when it stops working. So what if the moon disappeared for 24 hours? You would lose more than a bright object in the night sky. You would lose the strongest driver of Earth's tides. You would disrupt ecosystems, confuse animals, darken the planet, unsettle humanity, and reveal just how much of our world depends on something most of us barely think about. And when it came back, assuming it came back, the relief would be enormous. But so would the realization that this giant rock we treat like scenery is actually one of the reasons Earth feels so stable in the first place. And if it ever took even one day off, the whole planet would notice.